let's take a look at some military field manuals and use their tactics in Door Kickers 2. You may assume that these would be the best ways to clear a room, but you might be mistaken. Today, we will compare military SOP as provided by some field manuals and contrast them with the police tactics I used while on a SWAT team. Let's see which tactics prevail. We'll focus on entries into corner-fed and center-fed rooms. Today, we'll be using Field Manual 90-10-1 from the U.S. Army. It's an infantryman's guide to combat in built-up areas. Specifically, we'll be looking at Appendix K, which is close quarters combat techniques. For the military SOP on the center-fed door, we're going to start with a 4-man team because that's what we were able to find in the field manual. So as you can see here, we have our simulation ready to go with each member of the team doing exactly what is called for in the field manual. So we'll start with a 4-man team using military tactics. We're going to run the simulation 10 times and see how the operators fare. Now as we watch these operators go through these scenarios, I want you to pay attention and see that the number 1 man is going to flow straight across. The number 2 man is having to button hook. If at all possible, in my opinion, you should try and set up with cross coverage. That way both operators can flow straight across. As you can see, the number 2 man is very slow getting around that corner doing the button hook, which actually leads to the number 1 man either being killed or shot in the back every single time he comes into the room. The military puts a strong emphasis on everyone going to their assigned sector and sticking with their assigned sector. However, this leads to a position where the number 1 man is always getting shot in the back because he's not allowed to take the time to step center and flow across to the other side of the door prior to making entry. Here we can see literally every single time the number 1 man went through the door, he was either killed or injured. The number 2 man was either killed or injured 80% of the time. Meanwhile, the 3 and 4 man are able to come in and pick up the slack. Now let's see what happens when we use a tactic that I used on the SWAT team. I'm going to keep the enemies the same, but we're going to clear the room with only 2 operators. Here you can see we're going to have the number 1 man pie across the threshold and take out any enemies he can from the outside. Then we'll be set up on opposite sides of the door and we'll crisscross on our way in. Don't pay too much attention to the number 2 man doing that little back step. That's just the easiest way for me to have him show up at the door at the same time. Now you can see on these runs, by allowing the operators to stay outside of the room for as long as possible and take shots from the outside, it minimizes the risk of fighting 4 people at once. We can also see that as both operators are set on opposite sides of the door, it's much easier for them to flow across and past each other than it would be for one person to be doing a button hook. To do a button hook is to waste a lot of time in the threshold where your gun is not pointed at the bad guys. In this case, where both operators have their guns up and are flowing straight across, it's much easier for them to take out these bad guys in the hard corners. CQB is all about angles, and if you can get into a fight without getting into the room, that's almost always going to lead to a more preferable outcome. Now don't get me wrong, the number 1 man does get injured quite a few times here, and that just goes to show that CQB is a dangerous game. Whoever's first through that door is most likely to get injured no matter what. So now let's look at the stats for the police tactics. With only 2 operators as opposed to 4, in this case, the number 1 man was only killed 20% of the time, in comparison to the military, where the number 1 man was killed 80% of the time. I would much rather make those engagements from outside the threshold and not have to go in until absolutely necessary. So when comparing the police versus military tactics in this instance, I think I'm going to stick with the police tactics. Next, we will tackle the military doctrine of a 4-man team entering a corner-fed room. Again, you can see exactly where they want number 1, 2, 3, and 4 man to enter, which orientation their muzzle is in, and the path that they're supposed to take. Again, we've set up the simulation to have the operators follow exactly what is written in the field manual. So the number 1 man will flow straight across, number 2 will pick up those threats on the top, then number 3 will follow after number 1, and number 4 will follow after number 2. Now we'll see as these simulations run through, the military is very militant about having people go to a specific sector and ignore everything else because they've been assigned to that sector. Unfortunately, in this case, when there's multiple enemies in this little room, the number one man is every single time going to get shot by those people that are looking directly at the door because he's not looking up at them. He's been assigned to clear that hard corner in the bottom right, so the enemies in the top left, no matter what, are always going to shoot him first. No matter how fast the number two man is, he's always going to be too slow to take those guys out before they can kill his number one man. Now these are some pretty depressing stats, but the number one man is actually killed 90% of the time, simply because he's not looking in the direction where the most immediate threat is going to be. Now let's try this again with only two operators, but a different tactic. Here again, we're going to swing wide and engage those two combatants from the outside of the threshold. Then we're going to run the rabbit. The number one man is going to move up with his muzzle oriented to the right, while the number two man goes into the right. That's going to allow both of their muzzles to be oriented in the one corner that hasn't been cleared. Now as we watch these police tactic simulations run through, keep in mind that it's always best to get into an engagement outside of the room. A lot of people are worried about using the whole speed, surprise, and violence of action, but you can only move as fast as you can process information. If you willy-nilly sprint into a room and are going to be violent in your action and try and surprise your enemies, if you come into a force that has more bodies than you, you're going to end up in the dirt. If you sprint into one room and just go to one corner because you know I'm supposed to go to that corner, but you don't use your eyes and observe and orient yourself to what's going on in the actual room, you're not doing yourself any favors. CQB is about knowing many different tactics and applying what will work best for a certain situation. Not all problems should always be handled with one specific tactic. Now as we get to the stats, we can see that in this scenario, the number one man was only killed 20% of the time, as opposed to 90% of the time with the previous military tactic. So again, when comparing the death rate for the number one man, I'm going to be sticking with the police tactics rather than the military tactics in this situation. If you guys learned anything, hopefully it is that no matter what, CQB is dangerous, and there are many ways to get the mission done. Please drop a like and subscribe, share the video with your friends. If you liked this video, check out some of my other training videos here. I'll see you in the next one.